The rooftop bar of the Signal Soul glittered like a constellation brought down to earth, each crystal champagne flute catching the city lights that stretched endlessly below. Hana Lee stood near the glass railing, her black silk dress catching the evening breeze, watching the Han River snake through the glowing metropolis like a silver ribbon. This was supposed to be her moment. The culmination of 3 years of sleepless nights, rejected designs, and ramen dinners in her cramped studio apartment. Her fashion line, Celestial Thread, had finally caught the attention of luxury brand executives, and tonight's event was her gateway into the elite world she'd only dreamed about. She sipped her champagne, trying to appear confident despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Around her, Korea's fashion elite mingled with practiced ease. Designers whose names graced the labels of garments worn by K-pop idols, buyers who could make or break a brand with a single order, and influencers whose Instagram posts reached millions. Hana had worked tirelessly to be here, her portfolio clutched metaphorically close to her chest, ready to pitch her vision to anyone who would listen. "You look like you're planning an escape rather than enjoying the party," a voice said behind her, smooth as aged whiskey and just as intoxicating. Hana turned, and her breath caught. The man standing before her was unlike anyone else in the room. While the other guests wore designer suits with calculated casualness, he wore his like armor, a perfectly tailored black three-piece that emphasized broad shoulders and a trim waist. His dark hair was styled in an impeccable slicked-back cut that screamed Italian elegance, and when he moved closer, she noticed the intricate ink that climbed from beneath his collar, dark lines and symbols that disappeared under the fabric of his shirt. 2 buttons of his white dress shirt were undone, revealing more of the artwork that decorated his chest and the glint of a gold chain that rested against his skin. But it was his face that held her captive. Sharp jawline, full lips curved in a knowing smile, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. On his wrist, a Patek Philippe caught the ambient glow, the kind of watch that cost more than her entire year's rent. A gold signet ring adorned his right hand, and the way he held his tumbler of whiskey suggested someone accustomed to having the world arrange itself according to his preferences. "I'm not escaping," Hana replied, finding her voice despite the unexpected flutter in her chest. "Just observing." "Observing," he repeated, taking a step closer. The scent of his cologne, something expensive with notes of oud and leather, enveloped her. "That's what designers do, isn't it? Watch the world and find ways to make it more beautiful." She tilted her head, studying him. "You know I'm a designer." "Hana Lee, Celestial Thread. Your collection uses sustainable fabrics with traditional Korean embroidery techniques reimagined for modern silhouettes." His smile widened at her surprised expression. "I make it my business to know interesting people." There was something unsettling about how much he knew, but also thrilling. "And you are?" "June Park." He extended his hand, and when she took it, his grip was firm, warm, and lingered just a moment longer than necessary. "I'm in import-export, among other things." "Among other things," she echoed, her designer's eye catching the details others might miss. The slight bulge under his jacket that suggested either a phone or something more concerning. The way his eyes constantly scanned the room even while focused on her. The deference with which a passing waiter bowed slightly deeper to him than to other guests. They talked for what felt like minutes, but must have been an hour. June was charming in a way that felt both effortless and calculated. He asked about her designs with genuine interest, listened when she explained her vision of bridging traditional Korean aesthetics with contemporary fashion, and made observations that revealed he understood the industry better than most people she'd met tonight. Yet beneath the charm, there was something else, an intensity that made her feel like she was standing too close to a fire. Exciting and dangerous in equal measure. "Have dinner with me," he said eventually, his dark eyes holding hers with an unwavering gaze that made her pulse quicken. "I don't even know you," Hana replied, though part of her wanted to say yes. There was something magnetic about June Park, something that made her want to step closer, even as her instincts warned her to be careful. That's the point of dinner, to know each other. His smile was confident, the smile of someone who rarely heard the word no. I have an early meeting tomorrow, she said, which was true, but also a convenient excuse. Something about this man set off alarm bells even as it drew her in. June's expression shifted slightly, the charming smile taking on an edge that hadn't been there before. He leaned in, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that his breath brushed her ear when he spoke. You don't say no to a Korean mafia boss, Hana. His voice was low, intimate, laced with amusement, and she laughed. Actually laughed, pulling back to look at his face. That's quite a line. Does it usually work? It's not a line. But his eyes crinkled at the corners, that devastating smile still in place, and she shook her head, still smiling. Right, and I'm the Queen of England. She touched his arm lightly, a gesture that felt bold even as she made it. It was nice meeting you, June Park, but I really do have to go. She turned to leave, expecting him to call after her, to try once more, but he simply watched her walk away. When she glanced back from the elevator, he was still there, that same knowing smile on his face, raising his glass to her in a silent toast. The gesture sent an inexplicable shiver down her spine, though she couldn't have said why. He was just a charming man with a good sense of humor and an outrageous pickup line. She would probably never see him again. The elevator doors closed, and Hana leaned against the mirrored wall, her reflection showing flushed cheeks and bright eyes. Her heart was still racing, and she pressed a hand to her chest, laughing softly at herself. A mafia boss. As if Seoul's wealthy elite harbored anything more dangerous than corporate espionage and fashion knockoffs. She had no idea how wrong she was. 3 days later, Hana's life began to unravel in ways that seemed coincidental until they became impossible to ignore. The first incident happened Tuesday morning when she arrived at her studio in the hip Seongsu-dong district, her arms full of fabric samples and her mind already running through the day's sketching session. The building superintendent, Mr. Kim, stopped her at the entrance with an unusual expression on his weathered face. Miss Lee, you had a visitor yesterday evening, he said, his tone careful. A man in an expensive suit. He asked which floor you worked on. Hana's stomach tightened slightly. Did he leave a name? No name, but he left this. Mr. Kim handed her a small card, thick stock paper with embossed lettering. No name, no company, just an address in Gangnam and a phone number. The kind of card that screamed money and discretion in equal measure. She tucked it into her bag, telling herself it was probably a potential client, though something about the timing felt off. She'd been getting calls from brands interested in her work since the rooftop event, but they typically went through her agent, not showing up at her studio unannounced. The second incident occurred that afternoon. Hana had been having trouble with a photographer named Min Seok for weeks, a man who'd developed an obsessive fixation on her after she'd politely declined to use his services for her lookbook. He'd taken to appearing at fashion events she attended, sending increasingly unsettling messages about how they were meant to work together, and once following her home from a fabric supplier. She'd filed a report with the police, but they'd said there wasn't much they could do unless he became overtly threatening. But on Tuesday, Min Seok simply disappeared. His social media went dark, his phone number disconnected, and when Hana mentioned it to a mutual acquaintance, they said he'd apparently left Seoul abruptly for a family emergency in Busan. The relief Hana felt was tainted by an inexplicable unease. The timing felt too convenient, too perfectly aligned with what she'd needed. Wednesday brought the third impossibility. Hana received a call from her agent, Soo Jin, who was nearly incoherent with excitement. "You need to sit down," Soo Jin said, her voice pitched high with disbelief. "Maison Lumière wants to partner with you for Seoul Fashion Week. They're offering a collaboration deal. your designs under their distribution network. Maison Lumière was one of the most prestigious French fashion houses in existence, a brand that typically worked only with established designers who'd spent decades building their reputations. For them to approach someone like Hannah, whose brand was barely 3 years old, was unheard of. "There must be a mistake," Hannah said, even as her heart raced with excitement. "No mistake. They specifically requested you. Apparently, someone very influential recommended your work." Sujin paused. "They want to meet tomorrow. Hannah, this could change everything." It should have felt like a dream coming true. But as Hannah hung up the phone, that same prickling unease returned. Someone very influential. She thought of June Park's knowing smile, his casual knowledge of her work, the way he'd said he was in import-export, among other things. But that was ridiculous. Even if he had connections in the fashion world, why would he help her? They'd met once, talked for an hour, and she'd turned down his dinner invitation. Thursday evening, as Hannah left her studio and headed toward the subway station, she noticed them for the first time. 2 men in dark suits maintaining a careful distance behind her. At first, she thought she was being paranoid, but when she took an unexpected turn down a side street, they followed. When she stopped to look in a shop window, they stopped too, pretending to check their phones. Her mouth went dry with fear. She ducked into a busy cafe, her hands trembling as she ordered tea she didn't want, watching through the window as the 2 men took up positions outside. They weren't trying to hide anymore, and that scared her more than if they'd been subtle. After 20 minutes, she called Sujin, then her best friend Minji, unsure what to do. Minji told her to call the police, but what would she say? 2 men are standing on a public street? She was about to try anyway, when a familiar figure appeared outside the cafe. June Park, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, approached the 2 men. She couldn't hear the conversation, but their body language was clear. They bowed slightly to him, nodded at whatever he said, then walked away. June glanced toward the cafe window, his eyes finding hers with unnerving accuracy, and smiled that same devastating smile from the rooftop. Then he entered the cafe, moving through the evening crowd with the confidence of someone who owned every space he entered. Hannah's heart hammered as he slid into the seat across from her without invitation, signaling the barista with 2 fingers raised. Within moments, 2 cups of perfectly crafted espresso appeared at their table. "You've been following me," Hannah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Those men were keeping you safe," June interrupted smoothly, taking a sip of his espresso. "Seoul can be dangerous for a woman alone, especially one who's recently caught the attention of important people. I didn't ask for protection." "No, you didn't." His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "But I decided you needed it anyway." The casual arrogance of the statement should have infuriated her, but instead, it crystallized the pattern she'd been trying to ignore. "The photographer who was harassing me. He left town very suddenly." June's expression didn't change. "How fortunate for you. The Maison Lumière deal. You had something to do with that, too. I may have mentioned your work to someone who knows someone." He set down his cup with deliberate care. "You're talented, Hannah. You deserve opportunities that match your ability." She should have been grateful, but instead, anger flared hot in her chest. "You had no right to interfere in my life, didn't I?" He leaned forward, and despite her anger, her breath caught at his nearness. "You interested me, Hannah Lee. I don't lose interest easily, and I protect what interests me. I'm not a possession." "No," he agreed, his voice dropping to that intimate register that seemed to bypass her rational mind and speak directly to something deeper. "You're much more dangerous than that. You're a choice I'm making." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Sujin. "Meeting with Maison Lumière confirmed for tomorrow, 10 a.m. This is really happening." Hannah stared at the screen. Then a June, realization settling over her like cold water. "What do you want from me?" His smile was enigmatic, revealing nothing and everything. "Have dinner with me. Let me explain." "And if I say no?" "You won't." It wasn't arrogance in his voice now, just certainty, as if he could see a future she couldn't yet perceive. "Because you're curious. Because you want to understand what's happening. And because despite your very reasonable fear, you're drawn to me the same way I'm drawn to you." The worst part was that he was right. She was terrified and fascinated in equal measure, standing at a precipice she couldn't quite see but could definitely feel. Everything in her rational mind screamed to walk away, to report the men who'd been following her, to refuse whatever this man was offering. But another part of her, the part that had gambled everything on a dream, that had left a stable job to pursue the uncertain world of fashion design. That part whispered that June Park was a door to something she couldn't yet imagine, and she'd never been good at ignoring interesting doors. "One dinner," she said finally, "and you explain everything." His smile widened, triumphant and somehow tender at the same time. "Tomorrow night. I'll pick you up at 8. He stood, adjusting his cuffs with practiced ease, the light catching his gold ring and the edge of the ink that decorated his skin. As he walked away, Hannah noticed how other patrons watched him, some with admiration, some with what looked like fear, all with recognition. Whatever else June Park was, he was someone people knew, someone whose presence commanded attention and respect. She sat alone with her cooling tea, staring at the business card Mr. Kim had given her, which she now realized had been from June. No name, just an address and number. The address, she suddenly understood, wasn't a business. It was probably his home, an invitation extended even before she'd said yes. The presumption should have angered her, but instead, she felt something else. The thrill of falling, the moment before you hit the ground, when you can't tell if you're flying or plummeting to your doom. Hannah had always trusted her instincts, and her instincts were telling her that June Park was dangerous in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. But they were also telling her that walking away now would mean never knowing what she was capable of becoming, never understanding the strange magnetic pull between them. So she made her choice, even knowing it might be the wrong one, even understanding that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. She just had no idea how right that instinct would prove to be. Joan sent a car for her, not a taxi, but a gleaming black Genesis G90 with a driver who opened the door with a respectful bow and didn't speak except to confirm her name. As they glided through Seoul's Friday evening traffic, Hina watched the city transform from the creative chaos of Seongsu-dong to the gleaming wealth of Gangnam, where buildings seemed to compete for which could reflect the most light, which could display the most expensive brands in their ground floor windows. The car pulled up to a building that didn't advertise itself with garish signs or obvious luxury. Instead, it was all understated elegance, dark stone, subtle lighting, and a discreet entrance where another suited man waited to escort her inside. The elevator required a keycard to access the top floor, and as they ascended, Hannah's stomach fluttered with something between anticipation and dread. The doors opened directly into a penthouse that redefined her understanding of wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seoul stretching to the mountains beyond, the city lights creating a glittering tapestry against the darkening sky. The interior was masculine and refined. Dark wood, leather furniture, and carefully curated art that included both contemporary Korean pieces and what looked like original European masters. Everything spoke of money, but more than that, it spoke of power and taste cultivated over time. June stood by the windows, changed from his suit into dark slacks and a black silk shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing more of the intricate inkwork that covered his forearms, patterns that looked both beautiful and somehow dangerous, like thorns disguised as flowers. He turned when she entered, and his smile was warmer than she'd seen before. less calculated, more genuine. "You came," he said, as if there had been doubt. "You knew I would." She stayed near the elevator, not quite ready to enter his space completely. "You said you'd explain." "I will, but first, dinner. I promise you, whatever else I am, I'm an excellent host." He gestured toward a dining table set for two, candles already lit, the soft glow making everything feel intimate and slightly unreal. The meal was exquisite. Traditional Korean dishes prepared with obvious expertise alongside international cuisine, each course paired with wines that probably cost more than her monthly studio rent. June was an attentive host, ensuring her glass stayed filled, asking about her designs, her inspiration, her journey from a middle-class family in Incheon to becoming one of Seoul's most promising young designers. "You research everyone you're interested in this thoroughly?" she asked, slightly unnerved by how much he knew. "Only the ones who matter." He set down his wine glass, his expression growing more serious. "You asked what I want from you, Hana. The honest answer? I don't entirely know yet. When I saw you on that rooftop, you were different from everyone else there. They were all performing, trying to be seen, to make connections, to climb whatever ladder they thought would take them higher. But you were just standing there, looking at the city like you were memorizing it, like you were trying to understand your place in it. That's not so unusual for a party." "It is in my world." He leaned back, and for a moment, his carefully constructed charm slipped, revealing something raw underneath. "In my world, everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle. It's refreshing to meet someone who doesn't even know what game she's playing." "Maybe I'm not playing any game." "Maybe." His smile returned, but sadder this time. "Or maybe you just haven't realized you've already joined one." Hana set down her fork, her appetite fading. "The Mafia boss joke. It wasn't a joke, was it?" "No." The single word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. She should have felt afraid, should have stood up and walked out, called the police, done any of the reasonable things a sensible person would do. Instead, she found herself leaning forward, needing to understand. "Tell me." June stood, moving to the windows, his silhouette dark against the glittering city beyond. When he spoke, his voice was different. Less charming playboy, more weary king contemplating his kingdom. "My family has been part of Seoul's underground for 3 generations. My grandfather built an empire from nothing after the war. Gambling, protection, import-export that wasn't always legal. My father expanded it, made it more sophisticated, created legitimate fronts that made our real business harder to trace. And I inherited all of it when he died 5 years ago." "Inherited," Hana repeated, the word feeling inadequate for what he was describing. "Like a business." "Exactly like a business, because that's what it is." He turned to face her, and in the candlelight, his features seemed sharper, more dangerous. "I control interests in legitimate companies, real estate, entertainment, import-export that actually is legal. But I also control casinos that don't officially exist, shipping routes that move goods our customs officials don't inspect too closely, and financial networks that help people move money without attracting government attention." "That's," Hana's voice caught, "that's serious crime." "Yes." He didn't flinch from the accusation in her tone. "It's also the world I was born into. My father didn't give me a choice about my inheritance any more than you chose your talent for design. The difference is that walking away from my inheritance would mean death. Mine. And probably everyone I care about. There are people who would love to take what I have, and the only thing keeping them from trying is fear of what I'll do if they fail." She processed this, her mind racing. "The photographer who was harassing me, what did you do to him?" "I convinced him that leaving Seoul was in his best interest. No one was hurt, Hana. He was just shown evidence of some of his less savory activities and encouraged to relocate before that evidence found its way to the police and his family. Jun's expression was unapologetic. He was escalating. Eventually, he would have done more than just follow you. I simply accelerated his departure. You had no right. I had every right to protect you. His voice hardened slightly. The moment you interested me, you became part of my world whether you wanted to be or not. That's how this works. And in my world, Hana, I protect what's mine. I'm not yours, she said, even as something in her chest fluttered at the possessiveness in his tone. Not yet. He moved closer, and she should have stepped back but didn't. But you will be. Because despite everything I'm telling you, despite every rational reason to run, you're still here. Still curious. Still feeling this pull between us that you can't explain, and I can't ignore. He was right, and that terrified her more than anything else he'd said. She was still here, still drawn to him despite knowing what he was, what he did. The Maison Lumière deal, that was you too. I know people, I made introductions, but the deal itself, that's all you, Hana. They wouldn't commit that kind of money and reputation to someone without talent. I just made sure they saw what was already there. Why? She looked up at him, searching his face for answers. Why go to all this trouble for someone you just met? June reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, so at odds with everything else she knew about him. Because in my world, everything is transactional. Everything is about power and leverage and what people can do for each other. But when I look at you, I don't think about any of that. I just think about how I want to know what you think, what you dream about, what you look like when you're creating something beautiful. And that's new for me. Dangerous even. But I can't seem to stop myself. His honesty disarmed her more than any charm could have. She saw vulnerability in his eyes, a glimpse of the man beneath the Mafia boss, beneath the calculated sophistication. I don't know how to be part of your world. I'm not asking you to be. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He stepped back, giving her space, respecting the boundary even as he tested it. I'm just asking you not to run yet, to give me time to show you who I am beyond the title and the business and the things I've done, and to let me help you become everything you're meant to be. Help that comes with strings attached, she said, but without heat. Everything comes with strings, Hana. The difference is that I'm being honest about mine. He gestured back toward the dining table. Stay. Finish dinner. Ask me anything you want to know. And then, if you want to leave and never see me again, my driver will take you home. And I promise you'll be safe. The men watching you will disappear. The deals I've arranged will stay in place. No strings, no obligations. You'll be free. It was a test, she realized. He was offering her an exit, seeing if she'd take it. And the terrifying, exhilarating truth was that she didn't want to. She should have. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed that she should, but something deeper kept her rooted in place. Maybe it was ambition, the allure of the opportunities he could provide. Maybe it was fascination with a world she'd never imagined existing. Or maybe it was simply him, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and rare. The way his honesty felt more intimate than any pretty lie. The way her heart raced when he was near. I have questions, she said finally, moving back to the table and sitting down, a choice made. A lot of questions. His smile was brilliant, transforming his face from dangerous to devastatingly handsome. I have all night. And so they talked, through dessert and coffee, and into the late hours when Soul's lights began to dim and the night grew quiet. He told her about his childhood, raised in luxury but always aware of the violence that maintained it. About his father's death in what was officially called a car accident, but was actually a targeted hit by a rival organization. About the blood he'd had to spill to secure his position, delivered in matter-of-fact tones that made it somehow more chilling than if he'd bragged. About his wish to find a way out, to leave this life behind, even as he acknowledged the impossibility of that dream. And Hana found herself sharing too, about her parents' disappointment when she chose design over medicine, about the loneliness of pursuing a creative career in a practical world, about the constant fear that she wasn't good enough, that she'd made the wrong choice, that she'd wake up one day and realize she'd wasted years chasing an impossible dream. "You're good enough," June said with absolute certainty. "More than good enough. You're brilliant, Hana. You just need the right platform to show the world. A platform you're providing. I'm opening doors. What you do once you're inside is entirely up to you." He stood, extending his hand. "Come here. I want to show you something." She took his hand, letting him lead her to a room she hadn't noticed before. When he opened the door, she gasped. It was a studio, a complete fashion design studio with industrial sewing machines, a cutting table, rolls of fabric in every color and texture imaginable, and lighting that would make any designer weep with joy. "This was meant to be a gym," June said, watching her expression. "But I thought you might have better use for it. I don't understand. The Maison Lumière deal is real, but it's also just the beginning. You're going to need a place to work, somewhere secure where you can create without distractions. This is yours, Hana. Use it however you want. The building is secure. No one gets up here without clearance. You can work at any hour without worrying about safety. And if you need anything, materials, equipment, assistance, just tell me." It was overwhelming, this evidence of how much thought he'd given to her needs, how he'd planned for her acceptance before she'd even agreed. "This is too much. It's not enough." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I want to give you the world, Hana. I want to watch you create empires in silk and thread. I want to be the one who helped you become everything you're meant to be. And yes, I want you to look at me the way you're looking at this room right now, like I've given you something precious." "June?" She started to protest, to explain why this was moving too fast, why she couldn't accept such extravagant gifts, but he silenced her with a finger against her lips. "Think about it. You don't have to decide tonight, but know that it's here, waiting for you, just like I'll be waiting, for however long it takes you to realize that whatever this is between us, it's worth exploring. It's worth the risk." Standing in that beautiful studio, with Soul sleeping beyond the windows and this dangerous, compelling man looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered in his complicated world, Hana felt the last of her resistance crumbling. She was falling, had been falling since that first moment on the rooftop, and the only question now was whether she'd crash or fly. She suspected, with equal parts fear and excitement, that with June Park, it might be both at once. The next 2 months transformed Hana's life in ways she couldn't have imagined. The collaboration with Maison Lumière moved forward with stunning speed, contracts signed, materials sourced, her designs gracing the pages of Vogue Korea with the kind of editorial coverage most designers waited careers to achieve. She appeared on Korean talk shows, was interviewed by fashion bloggers with millions of followers, and watched as her Instagram exploded from a few thousand followers to over 500,000. Celestial Thread was no longer a promising brand. It was becoming a phenomenon. And through it all, June was there. Not obviously, never overshadowing her accomplishments, but his influence was evident in the doors that opened, the connections that materialized, the problems that dissolved before they could become serious obstacles. When a fabric supplier tried to back out of a crucial order, they suddenly changed their mind. When a competitor attempted to launch a suspiciously similar collection, they abruptly shifted their designs. When Hana mentioned needing models for her Seoul Fashion Week showcase, she received calls from agencies representing some of Korea's most sought-after faces, all suddenly available for her show. She knew she should have been more concerned about Jun's methods, about the implications of accepting help from someone whose business often operated outside the law. But the truth was that she was intoxicated by her success, by the rush of seeing her dreams materialize, and increasingly, by Jun himself. They fell into a rhythm. Dinner twice a week at restaurants that never seemed to have wait times, where chefs personally greeted Jun and presented dishes that weren't on any menu. Late-night conversations in his penthouse studio where she sketched, and he worked on his own business. The comfortable silence of two people who didn't need constant conversation to enjoy each other's presence. Gallery openings and charity events, where he introduced her to Seoul's elite, politicians, business magnates, celebrities, all of whom treated Jun with a mixture of respect and carefully masked fear. She learned to read the signs of his other life, the way his phone would buzz with a particular ringtone and his entire demeanor would shift, becoming harder, more dangerous. The nights when he'd cancel their plans with a terse message, and she'd see news reports the next day about a warehouse fire in Incheon, or a business executive found dead in what police ruled a suicide. The men who always seemed to be nearby when she was in public. Protection, Jun insisted, though she'd begun to understand they were as much about marking her as his as keeping her safe. "You're brooding," Minji said one afternoon as they met for coffee in Samcheongdong. Hana's best friend had been both thrilled and concerned about her sudden rise in the fashion world, and even more concerned about Jun. "That's not your usual designer stress brooding. That's man trouble brooding." "I'm not brooding," Hana protested, though she immediately proved herself a liar by staring into her latte instead of meeting Minji's knowing gaze. "You've been seeing that Jun guy for 2 months. The mysterious, insanely hot businessman who somehow has connections to everyone who matters in Seoul, and you still haven't told me much about him." Minji leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Hana, I've heard rumors about his family, about what they're involved in. Please tell me you know what you're getting into." Hana did know, or at least she thought she did. But how could she explain the complexity of what she felt? The way Jun could be ruthless in his business dealings, but gentle with her, attentive to her needs in ways no man had ever been. The way he challenged her creatively, pushing her to take risks in her designs while supporting her completely. The way he looked at her like she was the one beautiful, honest thing in his morally compromised world. "I know enough," she said finally. "And yes, it's complicated. But Minji, he makes me feel like I can conquer the world. When I'm with him, everything seems possible." "That's the problem with dangerous men," Minji said softly. "They make you feel invincible right up until the moment you realize you're in over your head." The warning echoed in Hana's mind later that evening as she worked in the penthouse studio, preparing pieces for her Seoul Fashion Week debut. Jun was in his office handling business, and she'd learned not to interrupt when his door was closed. But tonight, the door was slightly ajar, and she heard voices, Jun's and another man's. The conversation in rapid Korean interspersed with English phrases. She shouldn't have listened. She knew that. But something in Jun's tone, a hardness she rarely heard when he spoke to her, made her move closer, her heart beginning to pound. "The Hong Kong shipment clears customs next Tuesday," the other man was saying. 15 containers marked as electronics. The manifests are clean. Our contact at the port made sure of that." "And the real contents?" Jun's voice was cold, businesslike. "Pharmaceuticals, designer drugs from European labs, bound for clubs in Gangnam and Hongdae. Street value about $40 million once distributed. Your cut is $15 million, same as we discussed." Hana's hand flew to her mouth, muffling a gasp. She'd known Jun was involved in illegal activities, but hearing the specifics made it real in a way his vague explanations hadn't. $40 million in drugs. people's lives destroyed for profit. And June, her June, orchestrating it with the same calm efficiency he used when planning their dinners. She must have made a sound because the conversation stopped abruptly. Footsteps approached the door, and then June was there, his expression shifting from dangerous to concerned in an instant when he saw her face. "Hannah." He stepped into the hallway, closing the office door behind him. "How much did you hear?" "Enough." Her voice shook. "Enough to understand exactly what kind of businessman you are." He reached for her, but she stepped back, suddenly seeing him clearly for the first time in weeks. The beautiful penthouse, the expensive gifts, the doors he'd opened, all of it funded by activities that destroyed lives, that preyed on addiction and human weakness. "You knew what I was," June said quietly. "I told you the first night. You told me in vague terms. You made it sound almost romantic, the reluctant crime boss trying to find a way out. But that man in there, discussing drug shipments worth millions, that's not someone trying to escape. That's someone who's built his entire life around this." Yes. He didn't deny it, didn't try to soften the truth. "I have. And I'm good at it, Hannah. I'm good at being exactly what my world requires me to be. But I'm also good at being what you need me to be. Those two things can coexist." "Can they?" She grabbed her bag, needing space to think, to breathe, to process what she'd learned. "I don't know if I can be with someone who what? Operates outside the law? Profits from people's vices? Darling, every business does that in some form. The only difference is that I'm honest about it." His eyes flashed with something dangerous. "And let's not pretend you haven't benefited from exactly what you're now condemning. Your studio? Funded by money from gambling operations. Your Maison Lumière connection. The executive I introduced you to owes me because I helped him move money out of Korea when he was being investigated for tax fraud. Your Seoul Fashion Week showcase. The venue owner gave you premium space because I control the suppliers for his restaurants, and he knows refusing me would be expensive." Each word landed like a blow, forcing her to confront what she'd willfully ignored. Her success wasn't just her talent. It was built on June's infrastructure of corruption and crime. She was complicit, had been since the moment she accepted his help. "That's not fair," she whispered, even knowing it was absolutely fair. "No," he agreed, his voice softening. "It's not. But it's true. We're bound together now, Hannah. Your success and my support are intertwined. Walking away from me means walking away from everything you've built these past 2 months. Are you prepared to do that?" She wasn't, and they both knew it. The thought of losing her studio, her momentum, the platform she'd worked so hard to achieve, it was unbearable. But staying meant accepting not just June but his entire world, acknowledging her complicity in activities that sickened her. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to think." "Take all the time you need." He stepped aside, letting her pass. "But Hannah, whether you like it or not, you're already part of this world. The only question is whether you're going to face that with your eyes open, or keep pretending you're somehow separate from it." She left without responding, taking a taxi back to her small apartment in Hongdae, the place she'd barely visited since June had given her the studio, since her life had become this whirlwind of success and compromise. As she sat in her cramped living room surrounded by sketches and fabric samples from her pre-June life, she tried to remember who she'd been before that night on the rooftop, before a man with dark eyes and a dangerous smile had made her an offer she should have refused. Her phone buzzed with a message from June. "I meant what I said. You're free to walk away, but I hope you won't. Because whatever else is true, what we have is real. And in my world, real is the rarest thing there is." Hannah stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard, trying to formulate a response that captured the chaos of her emotions. But before she could type anything, her phone rang. Soo-jin, her agent. Hana, where are you? We have a crisis. Someone leaked photos of your Seoul Fashion Week pieces to a competitor. They're already producing knockoffs. We need to completely redesign half your collection in 3 weeks. The panic in Soo-jin's voice should have terrified her, should have sent her into a creative spiral. But instead, Hana felt a strange calm settle over her. Because she knew exactly who could fix this. Who had the connections to find out who leaked the photos? Who had the resources to ensure those knockoffs never made it to market? Who had the power to protect what she'd created? I'll handle it, Hana said, already knowing what she was choosing, already understanding what this moment meant. I'll make some calls. She hung up and stared at June's message, at the truth contained in those simple words. Whatever else is true, what we have is real. He was a criminal. He profited from activities that destroyed lives. Being with him meant accepting moral compromises she'd never imagined making. But he was also the only person who'd ever made her feel like she could be extraordinary, who'd given her the tools to prove her talent, who looked at her like she was the most valuable thing in his empire of questionable enterprises. Her fingers moved across the keyboard before her rational mind could stop them. Come over, we need to talk, and I need your help with something. His response was immediate. On my way. And Hana? Thank you for trusting me. As she waited for him to arrive, Hana understood that this was the moment of no return. She was choosing him, choosing this world, choosing to be complicit in exchange for the success she'd always dreamed of. It wasn't the choice her younger self would have made, wasn't the choice any reasonable person would make. But as she caught sight of her reflection in the darkened window, no longer the struggling designer, but someone who moved in Seoul's elite circles, whose name was being spoken in the same breath as established fashion houses, she realized she'd already made this choice weeks ago. She just hadn't been honest enough with herself to admit it until now. When June arrived 20 minutes later, she opened the door and pulled him inside, kissing him with all the pent-up frustration and fear and desire that had been building between them for months. He responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her, claiming her with an intensity that left them both breathless. When they finally broke apart, he looked at her with something like wonder. What was that for? For being exactly what you are, she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to say. I'm not going to pretend anymore, June. I'm not going to act like I'm somehow separate from your world. If I'm with you, I'm with all of you. The good and the bad, the legitimate and the criminal. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't lie to me. Don't soften the truth to make me feel better. If I'm going to be part of this, I need to know what I'm really part of. Can you do that? His expression grew serious, and he cupped her face in his hands. I can. And I promise you, Hana, I will protect you from the worst of it. You won't have to see the violence, won't have to be involved in the decisions that keep me up at night. But I won't hide what I am anymore. Deal? Deal. She kissed him again, softer this time. Now help me destroy whoever leaked my designs. His smile was sharp and dangerous, and exactly what she needed. Now you're speaking my language. And just like that, Hana Lee, who'd once dreamed of conquering the fashion world through talent alone, became something she'd never imagined. The woman behind Seoul's most dangerous man, complicit in his empire, bound to him by choice and consequence in equal measure. The only question remaining was whether she'd eventually come to regret that choice, and by then, whether it would be too late to escape. Seoul Fashion Week arrived like a beautiful storm, and Hana stood backstage at the Dongdaemun Design Plaza, watching models line up for her debut showcase. After the design leak, June had been true to his word. Within 48 hours, he'd identified the source, an assistant at Maison Lumière who'd been bribed by a competing brand, and ensured not only that the knockoffs never reached production, but that the competing brand faced a series of unfortunate setbacks that crippled their own Fashion Week showing. Hana tried not to think too hard about what unfortunate setbacks meant in June's vocabulary. Her redesigned collection was stronger than the original. Bold, sophisticated pieces that married traditional Korean aesthetics with contemporary design in ways that felt both reverent and revolutionary. Journalists and buyers filled the venue, along with Seoul's fashion elite, and she noticed with a mix of pride and unease several faces she recognized from June's world. Men in expensive suits who didn't look like typical Fashion Week attendees, their eyes constantly scanning the room in ways that spoke of professional vigilance rather than casual interest. June sat in the front row, devastating in a navy three-piece suit that probably cost more than her entire production budget. The tattoos that climbed his neck were partially visible above his collar, and his gold Patek Philippe caught the lights as he applauded with the rest of the audience. He'd brought several associates, men who ran legitimate fronts for his less legitimate businesses, and their presence sent a clear message to everyone in attendance. Hana Lee was under the protection of someone powerful, and treating her with anything less than respect would have consequences. The show was a triumph. As her final piece, a gorgeous hanbok-inspired gown that somehow looked both timelessly traditional and utterly modern, glided down the runway, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Hana felt tears prick her eyes as she took her bow, overwhelmed by the realization that she'd actually done it. She'd made it to the pinnacle she'd dreamed about since she was a teenager, sketching designs in her high school notebooks. When she returned backstage, June was waiting with a bouquet of peonies, her favorite flower, which she'd mentioned once in passing weeks ago, and he'd remembered. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice low and intimate despite the chaos of models and stylists around them. "The entire room fell in love with you tonight." "They fell in love with the clothes," she corrected. But she was smiling, high on success, and the way he was looking at her like she'd hung the moon. "The clothes are an extension of you. Loving them means loving the mind that created them." He handed her the flowers, then leaned in close enough that his breath brushed her ear. "Come to dinner. I have something important to discuss with you." The serious tone cut through her euphoria, replacing it with a flutter of anxiety. "What kind of important?" "The kind best discussed over wine and privacy." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and she realized with a jolt that he looked nervous. June Park, who faced down rival criminals and police investigations with equal aplomb, was nervous about talking to her. They went to his penthouse rather than a restaurant, and June cooked, something he'd done only a handful of times before, claiming his kitchen was mostly decorative. But tonight he prepared a simple but elegant meal, while she changed out of her show clothes into one of the dresses she'd started keeping at his place, her second wardrobe for her second life. Over dinner, June was quieter than usual, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like vulnerability. Finally, as they sat on his balcony with Seoul spreading beneath them like a carpet of stars, he took her hand. "Do you know what today is?" he asked. She thought back, confused. "Friday." "It's exactly 3 months since we met on that rooftop." He turned her hand over, tracing patterns on her palm that sent shivers up her arm. 3 months since you laughed at me for saying you don't say no to a mafia boss. 3 months since I knew my life was about to change in ways I couldn't control. June, let me finish. His grip tightened slightly, anchoring them both. "I've been thinking about the future, about what I want my life to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And for the first time since my father died, I can actually imagine a future that isn't just about survival and power. I can imagine something more. With you." Hana's heart hammered in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want out, Hana. Really out. Not immediately. That would get us both killed. But gradually, carefully, I want to transition my business interests to legitimate operations. Move away from the drugs, the gambling, the things that keep me awake at night. It'll take years, maybe 5 or more. But I think I can do it. I think I can find a way to become someone you can be proud to stand beside, not just someone you accept, because the alternative is losing everything you've built." The confession stunned her. She'd assumed June's talk about wanting out was just talk, the kind of romantic fantasy criminals tell themselves to sleep better. But the way he was looking at her now, the determination in his voice, he was serious. "That's incredibly dangerous," she said carefully. "Won't your enemies see that as weakness?" "Probably. Which is why I need to be smart about it. Make strategic alliances. Ensure my exit doesn't create a power vacuum that triggers a war." He pulled her closer, until she was nestled against his side, his arm around her shoulders. "I'm telling you this because I want you to know that I'm serious about us. About building something real. Something that isn't founded on fear and violence. You make me want to be better than what I was born to be." She should have been moved, should have been grateful for this evidence that he cared enough to risk everything for a chance at a legitimate life with her. And part of her was. But another part, the part that had learned to think strategically in these past months, recognized the impossibility of what he was proposing. 5 years is a long time, she said softly. A lot can happen. I know, which is why I need to know you'll wait, that you'll stay with me while I figure out how to become someone worthy of you. The request was unfair, asking her to commit years of her life to a maybe, to a dream that might end with them both dead if his exit strategy went wrong. But looking at his face, seeing the hope and fear mingled there, she understood that this was June's version of vulnerability. This was him laying down his armor and asking her to protect his heart while he fought battles she couldn't see. "I'll stay," she heard herself say, even as her rational mind screamed warnings. "But June, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If it becomes clear that getting out isn't possible, if staying this course means putting both of us in danger, you'll tell me. You'll be honest about the reality we're facing. I can't help you if you're hiding things to protect me." He pressed a kiss to her temple, and she felt him nod. "I promise. No more softening the truth. We face whatever comes together. Eyes open." They sealed the promise with a kiss that quickly deepened into something more desperate, as if both of them understood on some level that they were dancing on the edge of a precipice. Later, as they lay tangled together in his massive bed, Hannah stared at the ceiling and wondered if she'd just committed herself to a beautiful dream or a nightmare she couldn't escape. The answer came sooner than either of them expected. 2 weeks after Fashion Week, Hannah was working late in the studio when June burst through the door, his usual composure completely shattered. His suit jacket was torn, blood splattered across his white shirt, and his face was a mask of barely controlled rage. "Pack a bag," he ordered, his voice harsh. "Right now. We need to leave." "What happened?" She dropped her scissors, fear spiking through her chest. "Are you hurt?" "Not my blood." He was already moving through the studio, grabbing her laptop, her sketchbooks, anything that looked important. "There was an attack at one of my warehouses. 4 of my men dead. The building burned." This was a message, Hannah. Someone's making a move against me, and they know about you. We're not safe here anymore. The words didn't fully process. Someone's making a move. 4 men dead. They know about you. Each phrase felt separate, impossible to connect into a coherent reality. "I don't understand. You said you had things under control." "I thought I did." He grabbed her arm, not rough but urgent. "I'll explain everything, but right now we need to move. My enemies don't make empty threats, and if they know about you, they'll use you to get to me. I won't let that happen." She wanted to argue, to demand answers before she went anywhere. But the fear in his eyes, real fear, not the calculated concern she'd seen before, told her this wasn't the time. She packed quickly, her hands shaking as she threw clothes and toiletries into a bag, her mind racing with questions she didn't have time to ask. They left through a private elevator she hadn't known existed, emerging in an underground parking garage where a different car waited. Not the sleek Genesis, but an anonymous sedan with tinted windows and a driver whose bulging jacket suggested he was carrying more than just car keys. They drove for nearly an hour, weaving through Seoul's streets with obvious evasion tactics, until they arrived at a building in Itaewon that looked like a modest office complex, but was clearly something more. Inside, past security that made airport scanners look casual, June led her to a penthouse even more luxurious than his Gangnam residence. "Safe house," he explained tersely. "No one outside my most trusted circle knows about this place. You'll be protected here." "For how long?" "I don't know." He paced the living room like a caged panther, his usual grace replaced by barely contained violence. "Until I can neutralize the threat, until I can find who ordered this and make them regret ever touching what's mine." There it was again. What's mine? The possessiveness that had once thrilled her now felt suffocating, a reminder that in June's world, people were assets to be protected or threats to be eliminated. She'd become an asset, something that could be used against him, and now her entire life was being upended because of it. "You should have warned me this was possible," she said, anger finally breaking through her shock. "You should have told me that being with you meant becoming a target." "I thought I had more time." He stopped pacing, facing her with an expression that mingled guilt and determination. "I thought I could transition things slowly enough that my enemies wouldn't notice until it was too late. But someone talked, someone close to me. And now they're testing my defenses, seeing if I'm weak enough to take down." "Are you?" "No." The word was flat, absolute. "They're going to learn that going after me was the last mistake they ever make. But Hana, you need to understand something. This is who I am. This is what my world looks like when things go wrong. Violence, death, always looking over your shoulder. If you can't handle that, if this is too much, don't," she interrupted, moving closer to him, despite the blood on his clothes, despite everything screaming at her to run. "Don't give me an out now. You asked me to stay, to wait while you found a way to be someone different. That offer doesn't mean anything if you push me away the first time things get difficult." He looked at her like he couldn't quite believe she was real, this woman who stood her ground even covered in another man's blood, even in the middle of a crisis that would have sent most people running. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," she agreed, reaching up to cup his face. "But you have me anyway. So tell me what happens next. Tell me how we survive this." For the next hour, June explained the reality she'd stepped into. The attack had been ordered by a rival organization, the Busan faction that had been trying to expand into Seoul for years. They'd seen June's talk of going legitimate as weakness, an opportunity to seize his territory. The warehouse they'd burned handled pharmaceutical distribution, the same drugs Hana had overheard June discussing months ago. The 4 men who died had been his employees, fathers and sons, and brothers who'd worked for his family for years. "I have to retaliate," June said, his voice hollow. "If I don't, if I show any mercy, every other organization will see it as confirmation that I've gone soft. There will be war, Hana, bloody and brutal, and I can't protect you from all of it." She processed this, understanding finally the full weight of what she'd committed to. This wasn't a romance novel where love conquered all. This was reality, ugly and dangerous, where her choice to stay with June meant accepting that people would die, that violence would be committed in her name whether she wanted it or not. "What do you need from me?" she asked, because that was the only question that mattered now. "Stay here, stay safe. Let me handle this." He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might disappear. "And when it's over, when I've made sure no one will ever threaten you again, we'll figure out if there's still a path forward. If you can still love me after seeing what I have to become to keep us both alive." She held him back, feeling the tension in his muscles, the barely controlled fury that vibrated through him. This was June stripped of all pretense, no longer the charming businessman or thoughtful partner, but the predator he'd been raised to be. She should have been terrified. Maybe she was. But more than fear, she felt a fierce protective instinct, a need to anchor him to something good even as he walked into darkness. "I'll be here when you get back," she promised. "Just come back." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, a kiss that tasted like goodbye, even though neither of them said the word. And when he left, surrounded by armed men whose eyes held the same hard determination as his, Hana was left alone in the safe house, with the devastating realization that she'd fallen in love with a man who might not survive the week. She'd chosen him knowing what he was, but she'd never truly understood what that choice would cost. Now, sitting in a luxurious prison while somewhere in Seoul, her lover waged war to protect her, she finally grasped the full weight of the world she'd entered. The only question was whether her love was strong enough to survive it, or whether by the time this was over, there would be anything left of either of them worth saving. For 3 days, Hana lived in the safe house with no information beyond what she could glean from news reports that spoke carefully about gang violence, in vague terms that revealed nothing useful. The men guarding her were professional and polite, but refused to answer her questions about June, about what was happening, about when she might leave. She tried to work, sketching designs to keep her mind occupied, but her hands shook too badly to create anything coherent. She existed in a state of suspended terror, every sound making her jump, every hour that passed without word, another eternity of not knowing if June was alive or dead. On the 4th morning, she woke to find Minji sitting in the living room, looking exhausted and frightened. "What are you doing here?" Hana asked, rushing to embrace her friend. "How did you even find this place?" "June's people brought me. He sent a message saying you needed someone." Minji pulled back, studying Hana's face with worried eyes. "Hana, what the hell is going on? There are rumors all over Seoul. They're saying there's a gang war, that people have died, and you've been missing for days." Hana led her to the couch, suddenly desperate to talk to someone who knew her from before, who could remind her of who she'd been before June Park had upended her entire existence. She told Minji everything, about June's world, about the attack, about the impossible position she found herself in, loving a man whose life was built on violence and crime. To her credit, Minji didn't immediately tell her to run. Instead, she listened with growing horror and something that looked like sympathy. "You love him," she said finally, not a question but a statement of undeniable fact. "Yes." Saying it aloud felt like both relief and condemnation. Even knowing what he is, what he does, especially knowing. Hana met her friend's eyes, needing her to understand. "I'm not saying it's right, Minji. I'm not saying I'm proud of the choices I've made. But June isn't just the monster people make him out to be. He's trapped in this life the same way I'm trapped now. And he's trying to find a way out, trying to be better. How can I abandon him when he needs me most?" Minji was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "You're either the bravest person I know, or the most foolish. Maybe both." She took Hana's hand. "But if you're going to stay, if you're really committed to this path, then you need to do it with your eyes open. No more pretending you're somehow separate from his world. If you're his partner, then you need to understand what that means." The wisdom in her words cut deep, forcing Hana to confront what she'd been avoiding. She'd been playing at being part of June's world while maintaining some imaginary distance, as if her love for him could exist separately from the reality of how he earned his power. But that distance was an illusion. Every designer dress she wore, every connection she made, every door that opened for her career, all of it was built on the foundation of June's empire. She couldn't love him and reject what he was. She had to accept all of it or none of it. That night, June finally returned. He looked like he'd aged years in 4 days, exhausted, still wearing clothes that bore evidence of violence, his face carved with lines of stress and fatigue. But he was alive, and the relief Hana felt at seeing him was so intense she nearly collapsed. "It's over," he said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "The Busan faction has been dealt with. Their leadership is dead or in hiding. The other organizations have been warned what happens when someone comes after what's mine. We're safe now." "For how long?" Hana asked, because she'd learned that safety in his world was always temporary. "Long enough." He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperation that suggested he'd been as afraid for her as she'd been for him. "Long enough for me to start the process I promised you. To begin extracting myself from the parts of the business that brought this violence to your door." Over the next weeks, they returned to a new normal. Hana moved into June's penthouse officially, no longer maintaining the pretense of her separate apartment. She continued her work with Maison Lumière, but with a new understanding of how her success was intertwined with June's empire. He began the delicate process of transitioning his interests, selling off the pharmaceutical operations to trusted buyers, investing in legitimate real estate and entertainment ventures, slowly reshaping his public image from crime boss to controversial businessman with a questionable past. It was dangerous work. Every transition created opportunities for rivals to exploit. Every sale opened questions about whether June was weak, whether his empire was vulnerable. There were more attacks, smaller this time, but constant reminders that leaving this world was never simple. Hana learned to live with security following her everywhere, with the knowledge that her phone calls were monitored, with the reality that any new person in her life had to be vetted for threats. But there were beautiful moments, too. Nights when June would cook for her, his guard finally down, talking about the life he imagined for them. Maybe a house outside Seoul, somewhere quieter, where they could raise children who didn't know the smell of gunpowder and fear. Mornings when she'd wake to find him watching her sleep, his expression soft in ways he never showed the world. Afternoons in the studio where they'd work side by side, him on legitimate business strategies, and her on designs, partners in every sense of the word. 6 months after the attack that had changed everything, Hana's collection debuted in Paris Fashion Week, not just featured, but highlighted as one of the event's emerging stars. She stood backstage after the show, holding flowers from every major fashion house in Europe, and felt the full weight of how far she'd come. From a struggling designer in a cramped Seoul studio to this, international recognition, offers from brands she'd only dreamed of working with, her name becoming synonymous with innovative Korean design. June found her in the chaos, pulling her aside into a quiet corner. "I'm proud of you," he said, and she could see he meant it completely. "Everything you've achieved, it's all you, Hana. Your talent, your vision. I just helped open the doors. You walked through them on your own strength." "We did it together," she corrected, because that was the truth she'd finally accepted. They were partners in all things now. Her success and his transformation, her compromises, and his gradual redemption. It wasn't the pure love story she'd imagined as a young designer, but it was real, and hard-won, and theirs. "I have something for you," June said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a small box, and Hana's breath caught even before he opened it. Inside was a ring, a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds, clearly custom designed, beautiful and unusual, and perfectly her taste. "June, I'm not asking you to marry me," he said quickly, seeing the panic in her eyes. "Not yet. We're both smart enough to know that timing matters, that there are still too many complications. But I'm asking you to promise me that when this is over, when I've successfully transitioned out of the business that brought violence to your door, when I can offer you a life that isn't lived in fear, you'll say yes, that you'll take this ring and become my wife and build the future we've been working toward." Hana looked at the ring, at this man who'd upended her entire world, who'd shown her both the heights of success and the depths of moral compromise. He wasn't perfect. Their relationship wasn't perfect. But it was real. And it was theirs. And standing in Paris after conquering the fashion world together, she couldn't imagine choosing any other path. "I promise," she said, letting him slip the ring onto her right hand, a placeholder for the future they were building one dangerous day at a time. "When you're free, when we can build something without constantly looking over our shoulders, I'll marry you, June Park. I'll be your wife and your partner in whatever legitimate empire you build next." His smile was radiant, transforming his face from dangerous to devastatingly handsome, and he kissed her with all the pent-up emotion of someone who'd fought for everything good in his life. Around them, Paris celebrated fashion and art and beauty, and for one perfect moment, they were just two people in love, unburdened by the complications waiting for them back in Seoul. But moments, however perfect, always end. And 3 weeks later, as they prepared to return to Korea, Hana's phone rang with news that would test every promise they'd made. One of June's oldest associates, a man he'd trusted completely, had been arrested by Korean authorities on charges of drug trafficking and money laundering. And according to the prosecutor's press conference, this man was cooperating, providing evidence about the entire organization, including June's involvement in criminal activities that could put him in prison for decades. "They're going to come for me," June said after ending his own call with his lawyer. They were in their Paris hotel room, the Eiffel Tower glittering outside their window, champagne from their celebration dinner still sitting untouched on the table. "The authorities have been building a case for months, waiting for the right moment. Now they have their witness." "Then we disappear," Hana said immediately, her mind already racing through options. "We have money, connections. We can go somewhere they can't find us. And live as fugitives for the rest of our lives, never able to return home, always looking over our shoulders. That's not the future I want for us." He pulled her close, his voice steady despite the catastrophe crashing down around them. "I have another option, but you're not going to like it." He was right. She didn't. June's plan was to surrender to authorities, to cooperate with their investigation in exchange for reduced charges. He would provide information about rival organizations, help authorities dismantle operations that competed with his own, and position himself as someone trying to transition to legitimate business who'd been caught up in his family's legacy. It was risky, could still result in years in prison, but it was also their only chance at eventually having a real life together. "How long?" Hana asked, her voice breaking on the words. "My lawyer thinks 3 to 5 years, maybe less with good behavior. And Hana, during that time, you need to distance yourself from me publicly, for your career, for your safety. Our relationship can't be public knowledge right now." The request cut deeper than any threat of prison. After everything they'd been through, all the promises they'd made, he was asking her to pretend he didn't exist, to continue building her fashion empire while he sat in a cell, to attend events and give interviews without mentioning the man who'd helped her achieve everything. "I can't do that," she said. "I can't just abandon you." "You're not abandoning me. You're surviving. You're protecting everything we've built." He cupped her face, forcing her to look at him. "I need you to promise me, Hana. Promise me you'll keep working, keep creating, keep building celestial thread into the empire you've always dreamed of. Because when I get out, and I will get out, I need something beautiful to come back to. I need you waiting for me, having lived your life and achieved your dreams, not put everything on hold for a man in prison." She wanted to argue, to tell him that love meant standing by him regardless of consequences. But she also understood what he was really saying. He needed her success to be his hope, his reason to endure whatever was coming. Her living well wouldn't be betrayal. It would be faith that their future was still possible. "I promise," she whispered through tears. "But June, You have to promise me something, too. Promise me you'll survive this. That you'll do whatever it takes to come back to me. Because I will wait. 3 years. 5 years. However long it takes. I'll build my empire and keep this ring on my hand and count every day until I can finally marry you. His answering kiss was desperate and tender and tasted like salt from both their tears. They spent that night holding each other, memorizing the feeling of being together, knowing that tomorrow would bring separations neither of them wanted, but both understood were necessary. 2 months later, Hana stood in a Seoul courtroom and watched June Park, dressed in a simple suit, his usual swagger replaced by quiet dignity, plead guilty to charges of racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. The prosecutor recommended 7 years. His lawyer negotiated it down to 4 with the possibility of parole after 3. As he was led away in handcuffs, his eyes found hers in the gallery, and the love she saw there was worth every compromise, every moral gray area she'd navigated to stand by him. The press had a field day. "Mafia boss falls," declared one headline. "Seoul's underground empire crumbles," read another. Hana's name appeared in some articles, always carefully distanced from June's criminal activities, presented as a talented designer who'd been unknowingly associated with the wrong person. She hated the narrative, hated the implication that she'd been naive or deceived, but she understood why June's lawyers had crafted it that way. It protected her, allowed her career to continue even as his ended. For 4 months after his sentencing, Hana threw herself into work with manic intensity. She expanded Celestial Thread into international markets, opened a flagship store in Gangnam where she'd once walked with June, launched a sustainable fabric initiative that earned praise from environmental groups. She appeared on magazine covers, gave interviews to fashion publications, and carefully maintained the fiction that June had been a mistake she'd moved past. But privately, she visited him every week at Seoul Detention Center, maintaining the connection even if the world couldn't know about it. They talked through plexiglass barriers, shared the mundane details of their separate lives, and held on to each other across a distance that felt insurmountable, but wasn't actually infinite. 3 years, maybe less, and he'd be free. They could endure 3 years for a lifetime together. Then came the night that shattered every careful plan they'd made. Hana was leaving her studio late, her security detail having been reduced to a single guard now that June's enemies had scattered. She didn't see the men until they were on her, moving with professional precision born of training and intent. A van, a struggle, a sharp pain as something struck her head, and then darkness. She woke in a warehouse that smelled of salt and fish, bound to a chair with her head pounding and her vision blurred. 3 men stood before her, faces covered, but their voices were educated, controlled, not street thugs, but professionals hired for a specific purpose. "Ms. Lee," the leader said politely, as if they were meeting for coffee rather than in a kidnapping. "We apologize for the inconvenience, but you have something we need." "I don't have anything," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'm a designer, just clothes and fabric." "You have June Park's heart," the man corrected. "And more importantly, you have his cooperation. We need information about accounts he didn't disclose to authorities, assets he's hidden. And you're going to convince him to share that information with us." She understood then. These were associates of the rival organizations June had helped authorities dismantle. They'd lost fortunes, seen their own people arrested, and now they wanted revenge. They'd use her to hurt him, to force him to betray whatever principles he still held. "He won't tell you anything," Hana said, hoping she was wrong, praying she was right. "Even if you hurt me, June doesn't negotiate." "Everyone negotiates when someone they love is screaming," the man replied, and the casual cruelty in his tone made her blood run cold. They didn't torture her, not physically. Instead, they recorded a video. Hana bound and bleeding from the head wound, reading a script demanding June reveal hidden account numbers and passwords. They told her they'd send the video to him in prison, wait for his response, and if he didn't comply within 48 hours, they'd send another video, one that would show them doing things to her that would haunt his nightmares forever. But what her captors didn't know, couldn't have known, was that June Park had spent the past 4 months in prison, not just serving time, but building alliances. The same cooperation that had reduced his sentence had also positioned him as someone valuable to authorities, someone worth protecting. And when the video reached him through prison channels, he didn't hesitate. He called in every favor, revealed information he'd been holding back, provided authorities with evidence that would dismantle 2 more criminal organizations in exchange for one thing: immediate tactical response to find Hana. The raid happened within 20 hours of her kidnapping. Korean National Police tactical teams, guided by information June provided about common holding locations used by these groups, hit 3 warehouses simultaneously. They found her in the second one, traumatized but alive, her captors dead or surrendering in the face of overwhelming force. Hana was rushed to hospital where, despite her protests, she was kept for observation. She had a concussion, bruised ribs, and trauma that would take time to process. But she was alive, and that was what mattered. June appeared the next morning, escorted by guards because he was still a prisoner, but they gave him privacy in her hospital room. He looked haunted, years older than 4 months ago, and when he reached for her hand, his touch shook with barely controlled emotion. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "God, Hana, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. Everything that happened to you." "Stop," she interrupted, squeezing his fingers despite the pain. "You saved me. You gave up whatever protection you were getting from holding information back. You could have said no. Could have let them." She couldn't finish the sentence, the memory too fresh. "I would burn the entire world down before I let anyone hurt you," June said fiercely. "There's no information valuable enough, no protection important enough. You are the only thing that matters." She pulled him closer despite the guards watching from the doorway, kissing him with all the desperate love of someone who'd faced death and survived. "You don't say no to a Korean Mafia boss," she whispered against his lips, echoing his words from that first night, lifetime ago. "But June, I'm not saying no. Not to you. Not to this. Not to whatever comes next. I'm saying yes to everything, even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts." His answering smile was beautiful and broken and full of hope. "When I get out, 2 years now, maybe less with the deals I've made, will you still be waiting?" "I'll be here," she promised, "building our empire, one stitch at a time. And when you walk out of that prison, I'm going to marry you immediately. No more waiting, no more perfect timing. Just us, finally choosing each other without reservation. I'm holding you to that." He kissed her again, tender and reverent, as if memorizing the feeling for the lonely nights ahead. "I love you, Hana Lee. You're the best thing I never deserved, but somehow got anyway." "I love you too," she said. "My Korean Mafia boss who's trying to go legitimate. My dangerous man with his soft heart and complicated morals. I love all of it, June. The good and the bad and everything in between." The guards eventually pulled him away, time limits and regulations asserting themselves despite the moment's gravity. But as she watched him leave, Hana felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace, but determination. They'd survived everything thrown at them. They'd face whatever came next the same way. Together, even when separated, bound by choices that weren't always right, but were always real. 2 years and 3 months later, on a sunny Seoul morning, Hana Lee married June Park in a small ceremony attended only by Minji and June's mother. He wore a simple gray suit. She wore a dress of her own design, and when the officiant asked if she took this man, reformed, criminal, controversial businessman, the love of her chaotic life, she answered without hesitation, "I do. Always and completely." Their story wasn't conventional, wasn't the romance novels promised. It was messy and complicated and built on compromises that neither of them were entirely comfortable with. But it was theirs, forged in fire and tested by violence, proven stronger than fear or judgment or the weight of impossible choices. And as they left the courthouse as husband and wife, Hana realized that the man who'd once told her, "You don't say no to a Korean mafia boss," had been right in ways neither of them could have predicted. She hadn't said no, not to him, not to the life they'd built, not to love even when it came wrapped in danger and moral ambiguity. Because sometimes the most profound connections aren't the safe ones. Sometimes they're the relationships that challenge everything you thought you knew about yourself, that force you to grow in ways you never imagined, that demand you choose between the person you were and the person you're becoming. Hana had made her choice, and looking at June beside her, his hand clasped in hers, she knew with absolute certainty that despite everything, despite the fear and the compromises and the years of struggle, she would make the same choice again, every time, without hesitation, forever.